Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Monday edition of the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe with Mary Kay Cabot. It is a Hey Mary Kay edition of the podcast. These questions coming from our Football Insider subscribers, Mary Kay. Let's get right to it. And I want to start with this one. Dennis Blackburn from Tampa, Florida, says, Hey Mary Kay, love your coverage of the Browns. This is a hard question for him to ask, although it's not really that tough of a question, but tough question for him to ask. He says, Hey, Mary Kay, why is there such a difference between the outlook we as readers get from you, Dan, and Ashley as contrasted to national media regarding the Browns? Who am I to believe? Well, Dennis, first of all, you should always believe us. But there is always that disconnect between national and local. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think first of all, sometimes when you are in the thick of it and you're covering a team, you almost can't see the forest for the trees sometimes. And sometimes you are, just a little too close to the situation and you start to maybe see things a little differently than some people from the outside looking in see it. So that's one possibility. Another one is the fact that, and I think that me and you and Ashley all agree on this, that there hasn't been buy-in from the national media yet because of the Deshaun Watson situation. And I've said this many times. It's, for our purposes, we have had to run it back to football. We've had to go back now and say, okay, he paid his dues. He went through the counseling and the treatment program. He served his 11-game suspension. Now we have to go out to practice every day, and it can't be about his off the field issues. We have to run it back to football. And so I think that, I think that's another thing. I don't know that the national media is ready to do that yet. It's not popular. It is not popular to write about Deshaun Watson, the football player. I can tell you that from firsthand experience. Dan, I'm sure you've had the same experience, and I'm sure Ashley has too. When we write about him as a football player, we get a lot of grief and backlash on that. And so I don't know that some of the national media are prepared to do that yet. I think that some of them still want to, kind of ride out the off the field stuff and see how that all plays out. He does still have 2 pending lawsuits, and in the minds of a lot of people, this thing is nowhere near over yet. But again, for our purposes, we have to go cover football. We have a football team to cover because that's our job. We are sports writers. We're not court writers. We're not cops writers. We're sports writers. And so we are back to covering the nuts and bolts of football. And of course, Deshaun is a huge part of that. So I think there are a combination of factors. But I do think when we look at this roster, we see a lot of talent, and we see, upgraded coordinators. We see, a completely overhauled defense. We see 4 new pass catchers. We see Deshaun Watson looking really good in his new scheme and with his new supporting cast. So I think we see it a little bit differently than the others are.
I also think there's something to, being around it constantly and just having, knowing more about the team and the roster and kind of the people on. I was thinking about this today, like a guy like Marquise Goodwin, right? We've written about Marquise Goodwin. We've talked to Marquise Goodwin. We've covered all angles of Marquise Goodwin. I bet there's people on there's probably national reporters who aren't in the AFC North or aren't around, haven't looked at all the rosters who are like, oh, Marquise Goodwin's a Brown. Like that would surprise them. And then maybe they wouldn't even think about the impact he could have on this team. Whereas because we're there every day, we're looking at stuff. It's little things like that. I mean, I certainly couldn't tell you who like the Marquise Goodwin of the LA Chargers is right now. I just think being so close to it kind of gives you a different perspective than somebody who's looking at all 32 teams and kind of looking more on the surface of all 32 teams. And there's probably 4 or 5 other players we could look at on this roster and say, Bobo Okoronkwo, we know more about him than somebody who, is doing national coverage for like ESPN or USA Today or whatever.
Yeah, that's very true. And when you look at a team's record from the previous year, I think that weighs heavily in the minds of a lot of people. So you look at a 7-10 record, and I think it's very hard for some people on the outside to think, oh, geez, they're going to win 11 games this year. If you don't really dig into it and drill down into it and figure out what went on in the offseason. Why did they go 7-10 last year? I also think that if you look at Deshaun Watson's last 6 games last year, it's very easy to say, oh, he's just not the same quarterback he used to be. I think that that's another key aspect of it. But 2 of the games were kind of throwaway games, the Houston game and the Saints game. Those were sort of throwaway games for different reasons. And he did not have a large body of work. And then also, I don't know that the players around him made as quick of an adjustment to him as we thought they might. In addition to that, the talent level wasn't what it is now. I mean, you have significantly upgraded his receiving corps. So I think that had a lot to do with it too. Where he was throwing to a young guy that might not have been ready for, a no-look pass or a sight adjustment or a scramble drill or whatever, that's going to be different this year. So I think that he will fare much